If you want to know the first amount of money that actually changes your life, it is not $1 million. It is not 100,000. It is not even 50. The first number that really changes how life feels from the inside is much smaller, much less glamorous, and much more powerful than people think. It is $10,000. Now, let me be very clear. $10,000 does not make you rich. It does not mean you can retire. It does not mean you can stop working and disappear to the coast pretending you cracked the code while everyone else is still paying rent. That is not what this number is for. $10,000 matters because it is the first amount that can turn life from a series of small financial ambushes into something you can actually think about strategically. That is the mother line. Before $10,000, most people are not really planning. They are reacting, they are not building, they are patching, they are not living with margin, they are living with vulnerability, and vulnerability changes everything. If your savings are close to zero, every normal inconvenience feels like a threat. A check engine light is not a repair. It is a possible month destroyer. A trip to the dentist is not a health decision. It is a budget event. A laptop dying is not annoying. It is destabilizing. An ugly week at work is not just unpleasant. It is terrifying, because if this income stream breaks, the whole structure starts trembling immediately. That is no way to think clearly. And when people live like that for long enough, they start believing that this is just what adulthood feels like. It is not. It is what financial fragility feels like. That distinction matters. Most people think the biggest effect of saving money is that you can spend the money later. That is only half true. The deeper effect is that once the money is there, you do not need to spend it for it to improve your life. Its greatest value often comes from what it prevents. Panic, desperation, bad timing, weak negotiation, embarrassing dependence, the forced yes to bad opportunities, the forced no to good ones. That is why I care so much about the $10,000 threshold. Not because the balance itself is magical, because the state of mind it creates is the first real upgrade. This is the first mechanism I want you to understand. I call it the anti-panic threshold. At zero savings, every problem enters your life with a megaphone. At 10,000, most ordinary problems shrink back down to their proper size. That does not mean life becomes easy. It means life becomes proportional. The car needs work, fine, annoying, but probably manageable. The pet needs treatment, painful, but maybe not existential. The landlord raises rent and you need time to move, hard, but not impossible. You need to fly home for a family emergency, expensive, but no longer automatically debt funded. That is a completely different existence. And because money problems stop screaming quite so loudly, your mind finally gets room to do something most broke people are rarely allowed to do for long. Think I do not mean daydream. I mean think clearly. Financial stress does something cruel to people. It narrows the time horizon. It forces every decision into short-term survival logic. It makes you optimize for this week, not this year. It makes you choose the first job, not the right one. The first apartment, the sustainable one, the first answer, not the best answer. When you have no financial cushion, patience becomes a luxury item. $10,000 starts buying it back. That is the second mechanism. I call it breathing room capital. The real power of an early savings threshold is not that it makes you bold. It makes you less cornered. That is much more valuable. The broke person cannot really negotiate. The broke person cannot really pause. The broke person cannot really reject much. The broke person is often forced into compliance, not because they are weak, but because their runway is too short to support dignity. This is why I say money changes your relationship with risk long before it changes your lifestyle. A person with no savings hears new job and thinks danger. A person with 10,000 hears new job and at least has the option to ask whether the move is worth it. A person with no savings hears take a course, get a certification, move cities, invest in a better skill, and thinks impossible. A person with 10,000 hears the same idea and can finally ask the right question. What is the return on this move? That shift matters enormously. Now let me give you the third mechanism. I call it the identity flip. Most people imagine saving money as a behavior. I think it becomes much more powerful once it turns into identity. The first $1,000 proves you can interrupt yourself. The first few thousand prove you can stay consistent, but the first 10,000 proves something deeper. It proves you are no longer just a person who wants to be better with money. You are a person who has already become different. That evidence changes the way you see every future choice. Because once you have built 5 figures through discipline, patience, and restraint, you stop seeing financial control as some trait other people were born with. You can do it, you have receipts, And once a person has receipts, they make better decisions even before the next goal arrives. This is why I do not let people dismiss $10,000 as not much money. It may not be huge economically, but psychologically it is often the first time a person stops feeling like a victim of money and starts feeling like an owner of choices. That is a tremendous shift. And yes, there is math behind this too. $10,000 is large enough to cover the majority of everyday financial disasters that push people into debt spirals. Not all of them, not the truly catastrophic ones, but most of the ugly, ordinary ones that do the real damage, the kind that force credit card balances up, force personal loans into existence, force people to borrow from family, force them to sell investments at the wrong time, or force them to stay in bad situations because they cannot afford a transition. $10,000 interrupts that cycle. This is the fourth mechanism. I call it the debt prevention wall. People think savings is passive. Proper savings is actually aggressive. It is a line of defense against future stupidity, future bad luck, future weak bargaining positions, and future interest payments. You have not yet been trapped into making a person without savings says, I will just handle it when it happens. What that usually means is, I will borrow when it happens. And borrowed survival is one of the fastest ways to keep a life financially small. This is why emergency savings is not just a pile of cash. It is anti-debt architecture. It keeps temporary problems from becoming multi-year liabilities. It protects the rest of your system. And once a system becomes more stable, something fascinating begins to happen. Your decision quality improves. That is the fifth mechanism. I call it the decision. Fatigue release. Most people do not realize how much energy scarcity consumes until it begins to loosen. When your money is tight, you make survival calculations constantly. Coffee or no coffee. Dinner out or stay home. Generic or name brand. Can I risk this trip? Can I replace this thing? Can I afford to say no? Can I afford to say yes? Can I afford to be honest here? Can I afford to wait? That is exhausting. And because it is exhausting, it lowers the quality of everything else. Work suffers, relationships suffer, sleep suffers, health suffers, mood suffers, patience evaporates. You stop thinking like someone building a life and start thinking like someone trying to survive a week. $10,000 does not solve every problem, but it removes enough everyday danger from the system that your brain can stop acting like every grocery trip is a referendum on your future. That alone is worth more than people understand. I once told someone that an emergency fund is not mainly there to be spent. It is there to calm the system. That is what most people miss. The existence of the money matters more often than the use of it. It changes how you carry yourself. It changes how you answer an email from a boss. It changes how you negotiate. It changes how quickly you panic. It changes whether you can think in months instead of hours. That is real value. Now here is where the story gets even more interesting. $10,000 does not just protect you from problems. It creates room for opportunities. That is the sixth mechanism. I call it the opportunity unlock. A lot of people think opportunity is mainly about ambition. It is not. Opportunity often belongs to the person who can survive a transition. Can you pay for the certification? Can you go to the interview in another city? Can you float yourself while you switch jobs? Can you invest a little in a skill, a project, a move, a side business, a better setup without savings? The answer is often no, even when the opportunity is good. With $10,000, the answer becomes maybe. And maybe is one of the most powerful words in personal finance. Maybe I can take the better job instead of the safer one. Maybe I can negotiate instead of accepting immediately. Maybe I can spend a little to raise my income instead of spending everything to keep my current life from falling apart. That is where lives start separating. The broke person is usually optimized for endurance. The prepared person can finally optimize for advancement. That difference compounds. Now, let me say something unpopular. $10,000 is not just about how much you save. It is about who you became while saving it. A lot of people want the balance without the identity work. They want the confidence without the habits. They want the freedom feeling without the discipline that creates it. That is why they never hold on to it once they get close. They treat saving like a temporary diet, a little restriction, a little pain, a little sprint, then back to normal. That does not work. The people who reach this threshold and truly benefit from it are the people who stopped seeing saving as a temporary sacrifice and started seeing themselves as a different type of person. A person who keeps margin, a person who delays impulse, a person who is not easily cornered, a person who does not need to perform wealth because they are busy building options. That identity is worth as much as the money, because once you become that person, the next 10,000 is not just another number. It comes faster, not by magic, by behavior. That is the seventh mechanism. I call it the compounding competence effect. Everyone talks about compound interest. Fewer people talk about compounded skill. The first 10,000 teaches you budgeting without self-punishment. It teaches you delayed gratification. It teaches you how not to let lifestyle grow as fast as income. It teaches you how to think in future dollars instead of present emotions. It teaches you that small, repeated actions matter more than occasional grand gestures. That is why I say the money matters, but the person matters more. Once you know how to build a reserve, you are no longer starting from zero. Even if a setback cuts the number down later, you still own the system. And the system is what created the result in the first place. This is also where people begin to misunderstand what saving is for. They hit 10,000 and think, finally now I can relax. Now you can build. 10,000 is not the finish line. It is the first platform. It is where your life becomes steady enough to support the next layer. Maybe that means building toward 20,000. Maybe it means starting a serious investing habit. Maybe it means killing the last toxic debt balance. Maybe it means protecting the emergency reserve while building a separate opportunity pool. Maybe it means finally giving your future something to work with. But the worst thing you can do is confuse the first strong foundation with permanent wealth. That is how people celebrate away the very structure that was about to change their life. So let me be explicit. Do not spend your first 10,000 like a reward. Respect it like a bridge. It is the bridge between panic and planning, between reacting and designing, between being easy to pressure and slightly harder to control, between treating every expense as a threat and seeing some expenses as choices. That is why this number matters so much. Not because it impresses anyone, because it changes what kind of person you get to be in the face of uncertainty. And in the end, that is what money does at every level. It changes your relationship with uncertainty at zero. Uncertainty controls you at 10,000. You begin to push back, not perfectly, not permanently, but meaningfully. And that is enough to change the next move, the next year, the next job, the next negotiation, the next opportunity, and eventually the whole financial story. So if you want the cleanest version of the truth, it is this: $10,000 is not wealth. It is the first amount that makes wealth, building behavior emotionally sustainable. It makes emergencies smaller. It makes choices wider. It makes your brain calmer. It makes your identity stronger. And once that happens, the future stops feeling like something that is about to happen to you and starts feeling like something you might actually be able to shape. That is why everything changes after you save your first 10,000. Not because the number is huge, because for the first time, your life is no longer sitting one inconvenience away from financial humiliation.